All right, we're glad that you've joined the March 2025 TAM customer webinar. This webinar is organized by the VMware TAM organization to provide our customers the opportunity to interact with great speakers about content that will help them get the full benefit from their software investment. Before we get into today's content, just a couple of basic announcements. As you see on the intro slide, our next TAM customer webinar will be on April 10th, and the topic will be the VMware's private AI foundation solution. And so we'll look forward to some information about that, some good demos. And so watch for the registration link from your TAM. That'll be coming out here shortly. Your interaction during this webinar is important, so please make use of the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask your questions. If we are unable to answer your questions during this webinar, be sure and reach out to your TAM, ask them to follow up on your behalf. At the end of today's session, you will be prompted to fill out a simple 2-question survey related to the value that you receive from this session and any topic suggestions you have for future sessions. So your completion of this survey is a valuable gift back to us. We'd greatly appreciate you taking the time to do that. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make that recording link available to you. And then after a few months, the recording becomes publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. So you can watch for it there, as well as the past several years of history. Several of those are still relevant, and so might be worth your watching. With that, I'll turn it over to Matt Just, who's going to be showing us some of the great features of the sometimes forgotten jewel in the Aria suite, the Aria Operations for Networks. So Matt, please go ahead.
Thank you, Andy and team. Let me go ahead and jump over. So as Andy mentioned, today we're going to talk about VMware Cloud Foundation Operations for Networks. Our current release is 6.14, which is currently available in the VCF 5.2.1 offering. As Andy mentioned, from a suite perspective, VMware Cloud Foundation for Operations for Networks was formerly known as VMware Aria Operations for Networks, and previously before that, some of you may have remembered as vRealize Network Insight. So we've gone through some name changes over the years, and especially with the change to VCF or VMware Cloud Foundation. So this is a feature set of VMware Cloud Foundation or VCF, and referred to as Operations for Networks is the new naming for the feature set within VCF. So my name is Matt Just. I'm a product technical marketing architect here at VMware. I focus specifically on this product along with other products within our VCF operations suite. So today I'm going to focus on more of the Operations for Networks piece. As Andy mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to ask those in the Q&A, and I will try to address those as we go along. What I plan on doing today is kind of covering a combination. I know we have some folks joining that may be newer to the product. Just cannot hear anything. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you, Matt.
Okay, great. Thanks. So going to focus on, like I said, we have some folks that are newer to the product that may not be as familiar with what VMware Cloud Foundation Operations for Networks is, or what it can solve, and the value. And then also, I want to focus on some of the use cases that we specifically are focusing on within the feature sets that we're now offering here within VCF, which hopefully you'll see a lot of the great value that we add and bring, especially into focusing on key feature sets that are going to be targeting more towards bringing visibility into end-to-end visibility into your private cloud, your virtualized network devices, and other infrastructure. When I say other infrastructure, I'm referring to could be related to infrastructure supporting Kubernetes. It could be infrastructure that is underlying infrastructure, such as physical networking devices, routers, switches, load balancers, as an example, firewalls, that are underlying and connecting to the VCF infrastructure, your VMware infrastructure, that is running your applications and workloads. And this also, again, can tie into things like virtualized networking devices such as NSX. So running NSX routers and logical switches in the overlay, or just even your standard VMware distributed switches that are running within vCenter. So the key, some of the key functions that we bring within the product is, way in the slides here, is bringing in, again, focusing on from an application centric perspective, and bringing in application awareness, focusing on, you know, we talk about network. So obviously deep focus on the network, but we're taking an application centric approach. So what that means is the application is obviously, the target, that the our end users today are accessing, and the network is the road supporting and providing access to that application. So we want to make sure that, not only is the application from a network perspective and an overlay perspective performing as expected, but also the network that supports that application and access to that application. So that ties in both visibility into, obviously performance, optimization, troubleshooting, but then also can tie into security. So it can get into segmentation, making sure that we're providing security to our applications and ensuring proper access to those applications, or even in a multi-tenant situation, using things, like NSX VPCs to isolate environments and be able to have visibility and do planning, as an example, with deploying VPCs within NSX. So we even tie into doing planning there and ensuring security, and utilizing tool sets such as our intent-based engine, which allows us to define intents that run against our infrastructure, both from a virtual and a physical perspective, and are ensuring that we're meeting those intents. And that can be whether it's best practice intents, security intents, business intents that we're defining, that we have specific intents, objectives that we want to ensure that our infrastructure, both virtual and physical, are falling within, and that we're not seeing any type of configuration or anything that would be a failure in regards to that intent that we define. And we have a lot of out-of-box intents. We'll talk about that. And then we also have the capability of defining intents within the infrastructure. We call that part of our assurance and verification feature set within the product. So this is tying in, again, network visibility and troubleshooting across both our VMware infrastructure, our VCF infrastructure, and also which can compose of everything from, from the VM to applications to containers. It can also tie into supporting overlaying infrastructure, which again could be like VMware VCF NSX, HCX for like things like workload migration, and then getting into supporting even the underlying infrastructure that connects to and provides connectivity to the data center edge and so on for our end users accessing our applications that are running within our infrastructure. Now, one of the things to point out is, I think is a key thing to call out, is that we do this from an agentless perspective. So we don't deploy agents in the workloads to be able to, collect specific data. So we utilize existing data that we can access that's made available to us both through VMware products and non-VMware products, utilizing things like flows. So we do flow ingestion, APIs, looking at configuration data. That could be, via API, or it could be via SSH, looking at CLI configurations and so on, depending on the vendor and the manufacturer, what they offer from a software perspective to allow us to be able to gain access and be able to pull the data that we need to be able to do analysis on that. So that varies based on vendor, but we do it in the least intrusive way and least resource intensive way, within the product, utilizing our appliances. So the product consists of two appliances. If you're not familiar with that, that is basically a platform appliance and a collector appliance that run in your virtual infrastructure. And then that's going to allow us to provide that connectivity into both the VMware and non-VMware infrastructure. And then, so we have deep integrations. We'll talk a little bit about, some of those with various different vendors outside of VMware that allows us to tie that visibility in. And again, the focus and some of the key focus use cases are going to be that we'll talk about are around like application discovery, day two operations, faster troubleshooting. You see some of the results there as far as decreased troubleshooting time, reduced time spent to monitoring the network, decreased network outages. Those are actually results from a Forrester report that was done, a TOI or TI impact study that was done that you can actually access on our website and review that was actually conducted by Forrester and interviewing actual customers who are utilizing the solution within their infrastructure today. We have a question I see here. Is network operations the right tool to provide audit relevant logs of established traffic flows to the customer? NSX logging to VRLI is not optimal as logging each and every packet and not just begin and end of the traffic flow. So yes, I mean, essentially, network operations can provide logging data that is going to provide, all of the flow data, not just the beginning and the end of the flow. So we can provide, we do ingest all flows one-to-one and do analysis on those. So we can provide deeper analysis and exports for logging to be able to provide to customers or different establishments, security teams, and so on that are looking to do analysis upon that. So you can access those directly in the UI, or you can actually have those pulled via an API, or you can export them utilizing the exports within the actual UI, such as like CSV exports and PDF exports that can be provided as reports. So continuing on, talking about a couple other things, running applications, within our infrastructure. So a couple things that we want to focus on is, some of that can really bring some value is being able to assess first, by starting off by assessing our infrastructure, knowing what we have. So one of the key things, from an application and a network perspective is understanding what makes up an application. What is the application dependencies? What is its boundaries? In regards to it could be, inter-application communication to other applications, communications to, let's say, bare metal databases that are running, or dependencies such as network resources. Could be NTP or DNS and so on, shared resources between applications. So one of the key things is, as we deploy applications in our infrastructure, and especially when we have a brownfield environment, that we have applications that are older, that we don't know exactly, what that application, what communication is occurring within that application, what are the dependencies of that application, which is key when we're obviously wanting to monitor and optimize the application, or even migrate the application from one infrastructure to another. So let's say we're doing like from a non-VCF vCenter based environment, vSphere based environment, to, let's say, a VCF infrastructure. We want to make sure that we're ensured that we have full visibility into that application and understand what its dependencies are, and how it's performing. And then we can baseline that and then utilize that data to build out migration waves and so on in mobility groups and migrate those applications if we want to, or just monitor them within their existing infrastructure. So one of the key use cases that we'll talk about is the fact that we have the capability of utilizing speaking of flows, is ingesting flows and using ML technology to be able to do analysis and use flow-based application discovery. And then we can also do application discovery utilizing other feature sets such as VMs, tagging, ingestion from CMDBs such as ServiceNow and so on, and even providing and assisting with chewing up CMDBs, utilizing the flow-based application discovery tool set within the product. So this is very powerful in allowing us to assess what we have and what those dependencies are, both from a virtual infrastructure and from a physical networking infrastructure perspective for our applications running within our VMware environment. And then we can utilize, obviously, from an application perspective, I talked about, planning. So looking at app curation, migration waves, targeting cloud. So if we want to get into migrating applications, like I said, there's a lot of customers that are currently migrating, to VMware Cloud Foundation and from a non-VMware Cloud Foundation environment. And that can be both running in the cloud or be running on premises. And one of the things that we do is we have the capability of, because we have that visibility and that discovery of applications and those dependencies, is actually building out migration planning and being able to, map those applications out and be able to look at resource consumption, dependencies, building out a plan to migrate those applications, and then populating migration waves and mobility groups, and then committing those to tool sets such as within VCF, such as HCX, which is hybrid cloud extension. So using L2 extended segments in the overlay that allow us to migrate those applications, monitor, and see how they're performing as they go. And then getting into more day two visibility. So VCF operations and we have tool sets such as VCF operations, which used to be vRealize operations, and then vRealize automation or Aria operations, and Aria automation, which are now VCF operations and VCF automation. So just like similar to those tool sets, being able to provide enhanced visibility into the network and the infrastructure supporting from an overlay and underlay perspective. And I mentioned that we, have deep integration with various different vendors, not just VMware. So just to touch on that really quick. So, we do work with all, pretty much all the major players out there in both the virtualization space and the networking space and security space. So you can see, as an example, just some of the ones that we work with and have deep integrations with: Cisco, Arista, F5, Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Fortinet. You can see all that. And then obviously deep integrations into VMware Cloud Foundation, which encompasses vSphere, vCenter, NSX, HCX, the advanced load balancer, Avi, integration directly with what used to be VMware Aria Operations for logs and VMware Aria Operations, which is now VCF Operations. And then also tying into things like VMware Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, and Red Hat OpenShift and vanilla Kubernetes. So being able to provide container visibility from a network-centric perspective, and within our applications, utilizing either, like I said, vanilla Kubernetes or VMware-based or even Red Hat OpenShift. And these are just some of those numbers. Again, the benefits that we have as far as the value that we bring when it comes to optimizing and visibility and troubleshooting within the infrastructure. Again, this is based off of a Forrester total economic impact study that was done. Again, this full detailed report is accessible on our website. You can download that and take a look at that. Again, that was actually done by Forrester, interviewing existing customers, utilizing the feature sets within their infrastructure day to day, and detailed use cases are given, and some of the end results that they've seen utilizing VMware VCF operations for networks. Okay, so take a second here. Do I need additional license to collect flow data from physical firewalls? The answer to that is no. There is no additional licensing. So back in the day, we used to have two different licensing tiers. We used to have what we called an advanced licensing tier, and we used to have our enterprise licensing tier, excuse me. And basically, that is no longer the case. Everything that you have access to within the product today is going to be enterprise-based. So the enterprise-based feature set allows all the features and functionality that are offered within VCF operations for networks. So that does not require any type of additional licensing to monitor flow data from not just physical firewalls, but also you can pull in flow data from, Cisco switches as an example, load balancers, and so on to even enhance. And we'll talk about how that even can enhance visibility into application discovery as we talk about that from a use case perspective. And then one other question here, is network intelligence the same as Aria operations for networks? No, they actually are two totally different feature sets. So network intelligence is it's now kind of a component of NSX, and utilizes some different tool sets, and is mainly figured on, or mainly based on security. So implementing security using things like distributed firewalling and so on. Um, and it is actually a totally separate tool. And again, it's more focused directly on the security use cases, and is a separate from a VCF perspective. Today is actually a separate bolt-on or add-on to VCF. So it's not a native feature in VCF NSX today. But it is a additional feature set that you can utilize to go even into like layer 7 inspection from a security perspective, and do analysis, especially if you're implementing things like the distributed firewall within NSX. So let's talk about some of the use cases. And again, I mentioned, a lot of these, and so I'll kind of speed through these, and we'll jump into also some live demos and to kind of showcase that here within the setup that I do have in one of our labs. So focusing both on an infrastructure centric and an app centric perspective. Again, some of the key use cases we're going to focus on are flow analysis and security planning for VMware Cloud Foundation or other VMware infrastructures, NSX monitoring and troubleshooting if you are running NSX, also providing visibility or even some numbers into why NSX, or where NSX can actually provide enhancement and optimization within your infrastructure by deploying and utilizing NSX. So NSX is actually part of VCF as far as the routing and switching goes, so the overlay networking components. So standing those up and utilizing those to eliminate and optimize, I should say, eliminate things like hairpinning within the infrastructure, and optimize performance of applications. So we do bring a lot of value in showcasing that within VCF operations for networks. And then I mentioned application discovery, so we'll dive into that. We'll take a look at how we can do private cloud planning, migration planning, day 2 network operations, utilizing intents, assurance verification, some of the AI ML analysis that we do on applications such as traffic rates, packet drops, and so on, where we're actually creating and baselining the applications to understand how they perform from a normal perspective, and then looking for anomalies and alerting upon anomalies as we're starting to see those occur that could potentially cause application performance issues, or even be a security related issue that we want to deep dive into before it actually impacts the application. So being more proactive. And then again, focusing on the day-to-day network monitoring across VMware Cloud Foundation. So when we talked about the flow analysis and security planning, so there's a couple different things, and this kind of tied into some of that, around the question around NSX intelligence. So prior to basically uh, the NSX intelligence feature set within NSX, we had and we still have within the product we offer because we do one-to-one flow visibility. And the difference really between the two is the size of the scope of the environment that you're actually doing analysis on from a security perspective. So whereas NSX intelligence is going to be a smaller scope, defined scope, where within VCF operations for networks, it can go as as large as an entire data center. But the other difference is there is we are looking at like from a five tuple perspective where NSX intelligence is doing layer 7 deep packet inspection, which is the reason why it is a smaller scope, and more getting into IPS, IDS, and so on. Some of the feature sets that are actually part of that ANS add-on that you can add into NSX within VCF. Where we provide enhancement is from an operations for network perspective is we can look at traffic patterns and provide visibility into things like how much traffic is east-west, how much of that is layer 2 switched east-west, routed east-west, VM to VM, how much of that traffic that's occurring within the infrastructure is within the same, let's say, ES6i host. So VM to VM on the same host, but let's say that's actually running and those are two different subnets that those VMs are deployed on. And today they're not running on, let's say, an NSX overlay. So they're routing through the underlay. Well, we can eliminate and find and detect and show how we can optimize and enhance that and eliminate the hairpinning of going to the underlay for L3 routing and actually do that directly in the overlay to eliminate the need to actually send the traffic in and out of the VMware infrastructure. And what we're doing here, so we're ingesting IPFix and NetFlow directly, and also we support SFlow. So we can ingest those flows to be able to do a full visibility mapping of who's talking to who. Discovering, planning. Again, this is vendor agnostic, so this ties into not only are we ingesting this from VMware VCF-based infrastructure and non-VCF infrastructure, but we're also able to ingest these flows from third-party vendors and products, both firewalls, load balancers, and such, switches, routers that support standard network protocols such as IPFix or NetFlow or even SFlow. And that also is both IPv4 and IPv6 support. And then tying into providing against visibility. So we can break these up, and I'll kind of touch on this here in the demo. We can break these up by VLAN. We can break these up by overlay if you're doing VXLAN overlay and so on. We can do it by app, by VM, by vCenter, and so on, and showcase these different communications based on how you want to actually start and define your scope from a security planning perspective, and then doing analysis upon those to determine where the traffic is going, looking at things like top ports that are being utilized, how many flows, the total amount of traffic, looking at where's the majority of the traffic within my network or applications being consumed. Is it NFS? Is it database traffic and so on? Doing analysis on those flows to look at how they're performing, where we can do optimizations and so on, and troubleshooting. And then being proactive and being alerted when we're starting to detect anomalies upon any of those flows, whether it be traffic rates, packet drops, latency. So we're looking at like TCP round trip time as an example, and we're starting to detect increased latency on a specific flow between a source and destination. We can provide proactive alerting so that we can look at that and see what might be causing that prior to it actually impacting or having an impact on the actual end users that are accessing that application. And again, key thing is to talk, we do this all agentless. So this is all just by connecting, utilizing existing protocols that are available by both VMware and other vendors that allow us to be able to access those data sets and do analysis within the product itself. And I see, we've got some questions here. So, how old network logs can we see? So, from a data perspective, it is the data is ingested live one to one, and we do deduplication and aggregation of those flows. And then basically we're showing those over 5-minute intervals. And as we show the flows, now the statistics and the metrics that we're showing are actually live. So those are coming in and being shown there. But from a flow perspective, we do deduplication at the collector level, aggregation, and send the metadata to the platform that allows us to be able, and we display those over 5-minute intervals. But we do have queries that you can do that will allow you to go even deeper and see more, deeper into that 5-minute interval from a flow perspective. But the initial output is going to be on 5-minute. And we do retain all flows for up to a 30-day period today. And then all metrics and configuration data you can actually adjust inside the product, and you can go up to 13 months of data retention. So from a data retention perspective, it's 13 months for flows. It's 1 month, and it's first in, first out. So basically, the flows are rotated through, and that allows us to provide enough flow analysis to do things like security planning and ensuring we're seeing all communication occurring within an application from a flow perspective.
Hey, Matt,
Um,
the first part of this next question is gone. So let me just set the context a little bit. The question was regarding documentation or some enablement to help with the installation process and getting going, basic configuration, et cetera. So they're familiar with, the fundamental, the link to the installation guide. Do we have anything else that might be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a couple different things that can be utilized. One, we do have links that are accessible on our website and also on our VMware YouTube. That is called it's currently labeled VMware Aria Operations for Networks University, and it is actually a compilation of videos based off of use cases that allows you to walks you through actually not only from a deployment perspective, but allows you to go through each different type of use case that you're trying to focus on, and how you can actually quickly access data sets within the product and become more familiar. So that is something that is available. We also offer, both from a professional services perspective, we have services that help with support, deployment, and actually getting the product stood up and configured. The one nice thing is the product is very easy when it comes to like all of this data that we're talking about, and when we get into like topology mapping and so on, is automatically done by the product. So once the data sources, and when I say data sources, we're talking about like the vCenters, the NSX managers, the physical networking devices, and so on, are added as data sources and data collection starts. All of this is automated and built out and populated within the product. And then you can come in and adjust thresholds and so on. And also build custom dashboards based off of what type of data you're looking to access that may not be a out of the box dashboard within the product today. So we have PSO that can also help. We also have plenty of videos, documentation, and then we also have some other programs that we offer that our customer success team will work with you and help you get the product stood up. And also, if you have specific use cases that you want or you need assistance on, they can work with you on a day-to-day basis and assist on making sure that you're utilizing the features and getting the most optimal and beneficial feature or use out of those features within the product. So we do have different organizations, and your TAMs can actually get you in contact or assist with that if you do have any questions or are looking for any additional resources.
Looks like a few links somebody supplied as well in
Okay,
Q&A.
great.
So, yep, I'll leave those there for a little bit, then I'll
Uh, Power
move them out later.
dashboards, capabilities for 24/7 staff monitoring. Dashboard and capabilities, I mean, you can build and populate dashboards. We have a lot of out of the box dashboards For 24 staff monitoring, we have a lot of customers, many customers that are utilizing this within their NOCs and their SOCs. So basically, you can, have this up 24/7 for monitoring purposes. And that could be, for people that are in the NOC or within the SOC, or they could be for individual users that just want to focus on specific applications that they're responsible for and how they're performing. So we can touch on that. We can definitely customize dashboards. We can make it so that when they log in, each user, let's say they're logging in through Active Directory or LDAP or VIDM into the product, that they can even have custom dashboards that are their first initial home landing dashboard that pops up based off of the data sets that they want to monitor. And that can be monitored from a 24/7 perspective, but we also provide a lot of different alerting that can just either send different types of alerts via email, SNMP, data bus, and so on, that can provide alerting APIs if you have different tool sets that you want to be alerted upon, and then basically launch into ops for networks to be able to look deeper into that data set if you don't want to monitor the actual dashboards up on the screen 24/7. Can this be integrated with other tools? So, for instance, the network data obtained from VCF network environment be exported real time to another analytic tool? Yes. So we do have APIs. We do support SNMP integration. So all of the data can be ingested by other tools. We do have a lot of customers that are ingesting the data into other tool sets, again, utilizing various different methods, whether it's via API. So we do use a open API, REST API that is available. So you can pull any data. We do have a streaming data bus that allows webhooks to subscribe and pull data. And we also can do exports via CSV that can be ingested. And then we support other things like SNMP and logs and so on that could be sent out to other tool sets that, as far as I'm going to say non-VMware tool sets. Now, other VMware tool sets like operations and log insight and so on, we have native integration directly into those. So we can actually send alerting and applications that we discover and all of that type of data sets directly to logs and also into operations, and populate that data and have SSO integration where you can actually do analysis, let's say within operations, and then you decide, hey, this is something I want to click in deeper and look at more from an analytical perspective across the network, and it will launch right into ops for networks and take you to that data set. Looking at, okay, so we answered that live, done. Does it show real-time flow analysis? So yeah, again, the flow analysis is real time. We are doing one-to-one ingestion real time. And from a display perspective, the flow analysis is basically, like I said, aggregated and deduped and displayed over 5-minute intervals. So when you're looking at a flow, it's basically as you move across the timeline, it's going to display every, like a 5-minute display, but it's showing you the flow aggregated and deduped over those intervals, and then utilizing queries within our Elastic Search Engine. So just like querying within Google, you can dive deeper into that 5-minute span to do analysis. But the initial view over the 24-hour period in a window of a flow, let's say, it's going to be broken up over 5-minute interview displays. It says, so next question, is it possible to deploy vRealize operations for networks fully by using automation, for example, using Ansible? So you could build, yes, you could build and deploy automatically, utilizing tool sets like Ansible and so on. There also is as an example, if you're familiar with VMware Lifecycle Manager, which is actually now is a feature set that's going to be built into VCF. You can actually automatically deploy right within VCF and utilize Lifecycle Manager to do the automation of the deployment of operations for networks. but you can use other scripting tools and other tool sets such as Ansible to do deployment, or just do even a manual deployment of the appliances and setup. So we do offer many different methods that could be utilized. Absolutely. So that can absolutely be done. All right, and then can data usage be pulled per API, per network, VM, et cetera, for billing purposes? Absolutely. So everything in the product can be pulled API. So all metrics, data, it could be based on a VM, it could be based on an application, it could be based on any type of object that we monitor within the actual product. You can actually export data using API. Again, it's a REST API that we have, and we have a full guide and so on. All of that data can be pulled via API. You can also set webhooks and use our streaming data bus to stream those data analytics live, real time, if you have tool sets that you want to utilize also. But yes, and then those could be used for absolutely for billing purposes. And we do provide that integration you'll see in VCF, where we can actually tie into looking at the billing support within like operations and pulling data sets from ops or networks to do billing also. So there are some features there within like VCF 5.2.1. So, and then someone shared the YouTube videos. Appreciate that. Is it possible to send integrate events flows to external SIMs in real time using? Yep. So we absolutely can do that. Touched on that briefly. VCF bring up JSON file. Customer task or Broadcom team provides that to the customer. So we do support JSON. So you can actually export via JSON. You can export also via API, CSV, and PDF. So that is fully supported within the product today. And you can do that. I'll show where you can click and actually do that exportation. Network operations will be able to capture both north, south, and east-west traffic. Yes, so we capture all traffic. So what you're doing, as you can see on the screen here, we are doing analysis of east-west and north-south or internet traffic. So we are doing that analysis and actually breaking that up to show you what percentage and then which flows and which data is going where. So we do provide all of that. And then lastly is daily backup support in this version or in next version. Can we support a backup for a certain time, like other VMware applications such as NSXT? Yes, so we do support things like vSphere high availability and so on, and we have different backup capabilities that we support today, and those are actually being currently enhanced, and I can tell you that will be coming here in an upcoming release within VCF. So we are actually, there is a lot of different types of backup options and replication, high availability that can be utilized for backing up ops or networks. Okay, so I'm going to continue on here. So again, a couple other feature sets talking about like looking at Cloud Foundation, NSX monitoring and troubleshooting, or even monitoring the underlying infrastructure. So as I mentioned, as you add in the data sources, such as the vCenters, the NSX managers, the underlying network infrastructure, you can populate and you can do queries where you can say, hey, I want to see a topology from VM A to VM B and see what that topology looks like, both from a virtual overlay perspective and from a physical underlaying perspective. And that's going to allow us to provide out full detailed topology. And the nice thing is in these maps, you can actually click on any of these objects that are fully dynamic to look at the deep data set. So you got your virtual machine, you've got your host, you've got your firewalls. These could be either NSX or they can be, let's say, like a Palo Alto or Checkpoint virtual firewall, to be able to look at the firewall rules that are configured in place between the source and destination that you specified. If you're just connecting and utilizing a distributed port group connected to a VLAN, so you can see which VLAN is being utilized. You can look at the physical NIC, and the physical NIC will provide details as to performance, configuration, and what peer port is connected to on the underlying networking devices. So this could be, let's say, an Arista switch or a Cisco Nexus switch at the top of the rack. And we're looking at the different VRFs and hops and so on. And you notice these little red triangles that you see. So these are indicating that we're detecting anomalies or configuration issues on those devices that could be impacting this path. So you can click on each one of these and it will actually show you what are those issues and provide recommendations on how to mitigate those issues within the infrastructure, whether they're either in the overlay or on the underlay. And we utilize a lot of the data that's provided to us. Again, like let's say this is a Cisco Nexus switch. We're looking at Cisco best practices and data that's provided by their guides and providing analysis, but we can also pinpoint and kind of show you exactly where we're seeing, let's say there's an MTU mismatch as an example that's impacting an application. We've got a port that's not configured for jumbo frames, but yet we're configured for jumbo frames on the physical NIC. And so we have an MTU mismatch. So we can call those types out and tell you exactly which port we're seeing that at and what it's impacting. And then continuing on, showing you hop by hop, we can go from different locations. So if we have multiple data centers and we're going, let's say, to the US data center and our destination VM is in the EMEA data center, and we're utilizing things like, let's say, NSX Federation that's extending networks across the overlay and utilizing RTEPs and so on that are allowing us to provide connectivity. We can see and click into any of the overlay routing, logical switches, the extensions going to the other data centers, and then again, the destination virtual machine and any firewalls that may be attached to it. And those could be firewalls in the underlying infrastructure, or they could be running in the virtual infrastructure, both NSX and third party. And this is, obviously gains visibility for optimization. Some of the things you can look at as we talk more about, mapping things out from a migration standpoint, is we can look at a path and say, okay, this is what the path looked like 2 weeks ago. So because we are a time machine and all this data is retained, we can do this query and say, show me this query 2 weeks ago, and I can map this out. Then I can do an application migration plan, migrate the application if I wanted to, or I can make some routing changes, or I can do some configuration. Let's say someone makes some configuration changes that impacts the BGP routing table or OSPF routing table, depending on what routing protocols are being used. Just as a general example, and it now starts to impact that application. So we start flagging anomalies and so on that will bring attention to that. And then we can click in and look at that topology and say, what does that look like today, as an example, and do side-by-side analysis to see if we need to do any optimization, and then linking that any type of changes that were made either in the overlay or the underlay, because we're logging all those and associating them to that specific time to be able to show you what was changed and how it impacted the infrastructure, both from an overlay and underlay perspective. And again, that's very key into being able to determine, was this the correct configuration change, or what caused this, and is it something that we want to reverse or we need to optimize? And then also from a migration perspective, being able to do planning, looking at, hey, how did this application perform pre-migration and post-migration? Did routing hops increase? Are we seeing increased latency? Where's that latency at, and making determinations on what may have changed during a specific event. So as far as application discovery goes, I'll just go right into a demo on that, because rather than talk to a slide. We do, again, private cloud planning and DC modernization, as I mentioned. This more focuses on, as I mentioned, we can do visibility into overlays and underlays and so on, multiple data centers. But let's say you have connectivity. Let's say you're running like VMC on AWS, as an example, or Azure, and you want to see what that connectivity looks like, both running from that VMC on AWS and also running in the on-premises data center, and you want to see tunnel connectivity. Let's say it's an IPsec tunnel or transit gateway or so on that's doing a connectivity. We do provide full mapping capabilities there. If you're doing an M&A and you want to drop in collectors and collect data from a data center for an M&A perspective, you can do that and see what that connectivity looks like, and also what all the traffic analysis looks like without actually having to deploy ops or networks in that infrastructure. So we have many different use cases where we can get into planning and looking at different connectivity topologies, flow data analysis, and performance, and then being able to utilize that to plan our private cloud modernizations and DC modernizations. And let me just jump up. We'll talk a little bit about guided network troubleshooting. So we do have a feature set called guided network troubleshooting that's built into the product. So this uses more of a mind mapping approach where we can actually take any type of object, such as an application or a virtual machine or a router, and we can then start breaking that out and looking at all the dependencies and everything that is utilized, or that let's say from an application perspective that has dependencies upon that application, or that application has dependencies upon everything from flow data to metrics to switch ports and the underlay to the overlay, and do full analysis and visibility and troubleshooting, and even have our AL or AI ML algorithms that run that will actually help call out specific most relevant, or what's we're looking at as the most um, uh, from a scoring perspective as the cause to, let's say, a specific anomaly that we're seeing, and where we're seeing that out and flagging that. So we'll talk more deeper about that. Getting into the network assurance and verification perspective, again, mapping out topologies. We can do it from a VM to VM perspective. We can do it from a full, data center perspective, both, looking at paths from a overlay to an underlay. So going from let's say a specific host that is running NSX, or just a standard virtual distributed switch that has VMs that are running and connected, and how they're actually traversing the underlay networking infrastructure, whether it be Cisco, Nexus, Catalyst, Arista switches, and so on, or firewalls or load balancers, and then how it's routed to a destination VMware host to reach, let's say, a destination virtual machine, or from a Kubernetes perspective, within an application, and then being able to also see detailed data such as is there configuration issues? Are there firewall or ACLs that are deployed that are stopping or are segmenting, which may be on purpose, between a source and destination? So doing segmentation checks and defining an intent that runs and says, I want to ensure I have full segmentation between this source and this destination, and it will constantly run checks across that, both the virtual and physical infrastructure, and alert you if we're seeing a failed intent and where that intent is failing. Same thing with like reachability, ensuring that we have full-time reachability. Let's say we can define those types of intents and have those run. And that's all because we're pulling configuration data and flows and so on from the infrastructure to be able to do full analysis upon that and make determination if those intents are being breached or failing. And again, you can see a lot of that stuff that we're calling out here, like loops detected in the network, reachability failures, segmentation failures, port mode mismatches. So we're checking a lot of different intents across the infrastructure from an entire data center perspective, both in the overlay and the underlay, to provide visibility, and then clicking into each one of these to be able to look at where those are occurring, where they're occurring at, whether it's in the overlay or the underlay, and what can be done to what are the recommendations to actually make those changes, or optimize that so that those are eliminated. So quickly, just architecture. I mentioned, we utilize two different types of appliances today. We use a collector VM or a collector appliance, and you can deploy multiple collector appliances. These are sized based on the number of virtual machines that you're going to have data pulled from the collector. As an example, so let's say you have 24,000 virtual machines, you can deploy a collector and have it pull data from a vCenter, as an example, that is managing 24,000 VMs, and then let's say you want to do another vCenter, or multiple collectors depending on what type of data you want to collect. And you can see here the different protocols as an example that we're using, and this is just a general kind of example, but ingesting NetFlow, SFlow, physical flows via IPFix, what ports we're utilizing. This is just data that goes directly to the collector VM. Read-only credentials that are utilized for access to APIs and through protocols such as SSH and SNMP that we support. And then all of that data is done and stored on the collector and deduped, aggregated, and then via a tunnel to the platform, which is basically the user interface, and the database is being sent from the collector to the platform from a metadata perspective. So majority of the data stays on the collector VM. It's more of just the metadata. So it's actually the difference between the data that goes to the collector to the actual platform, because you can deploy the platform in different locations. And as I mentioned, let's say you're doing an M&A and you drop in a collector at a future or at an acquisition and you're collecting data, you can send that over a data center interconnect or a tunnel to the actual platform. And it's only technically, I mean, when we say data reduction, we're looking at, basically 70% of the data is reduced, from a flow and from a metrics perspective. You're only sending about 30% of the data that you're collecting to the actual platform on average. So we have a question. What are the rules or strategy to scale or for really busy data centers? Do we have limit regarding appliances or rules? No. So there is no limit on the number of appliances. So we basically have on the appliance perspective, so the platforms can be deployed into a cluster, so they can scale out on the fly. So you can actually, as you're growing and so on, you can say, okay, we're now, let's say we went from 16,000 virtual machines to 50,000 virtual machines. And now we're up to 125,000 virtual machines running in our infrastructure. Or, we could be looking at the underlying network infrastructure. So that is all based on what the collector can support and what the platform can support. And then if you're increasing beyond the capacity of the collector or the platform, you can on the fly spin up an additional appliance to add additional scale to support your infrastructure. So there is no limitation there. We do have the capabilities of scaling to very, very large infrastructures, well over 100,000 virtual machines, multiple data centers, cloud platforms, and so on, to be able to do analysis upon that data. And again, deep integrations into various different data sources. And this one also calls out, we do tie into some of our own solutions that you can run on hyperscalers, such as VCF license portability that we offer for AWS, Azure, Google, Outpost, and even Oracle. So let me go ahead and look. We're seeing questions. Looks like we're good on questions, and just want to take a look at time here. So what I'll do here really quick is let me jump over to the environment and log in. Okay, so basically what I'm showing is the actual dashboard when you log into Ops for Networks. So you do use a browser. So we support like Chrome and Firefox and so on, different browsers. You'll log in. Each user can log in and have their own dashboards. The native dashboard that you log into is the Get Started dashboard. You can also change this depending on, if you don't want this dashboard to pop up. But basically what this is going to do is give us an overview of one, how is our environment performing? When I say our environment, this here is looking at our data collection sets that we're getting, as an example, processing lag, indexer lag, grid usage. This is for looking at the performance, and when we say the system infrastructure of Ops for Network. So here's our collector VMs, our platform VMs. I can see I've got 3 of those that are deployed. And if we're seeing any type of detected issues, to make sure that that Ops for Networks is performing and running smoothly. So we see we're good there. We also provide data sets into alerts. So these are just a quick call out of how many critical alerts and how many warning based alerts. And these are based on criticality, and these can be also adjusted and defined within the product. But these are looking at the entire infrastructure, both overlay and underlay, and calling out alerts. So if I wanted to click in and right away start off with 23 alerts, I can click on the critical and I can see where I've got analytical alerts, or I can see vCenter managing one or more Fabric node in NSXT is not added as a data source, as an example. Configuration best practice, BGP neighbor is not established, and I can expand and start looking at, where is that? What is the neighbor IP? What is the recommendation? So we can see a lot of different data sets that you can click right off the dashboard and jump into from an alert perspective, and you can also filter those. And now I can say, warning, I got firewall rules are being masked by preceding rule. If I expand that, it's showing me, the default rules that are to be deployed, and that's the reason when they're being masked, because that's actually um, uh, the default layer 2 and layer 3 rule that's deployed by NSX if you're using the distributed firewall as an example. So since there's no rules been configured, it's considered these being masked. So you can actually go through and have access to all the alerts right from the main dashboard if you want to. We're also pulling insights that we think are important that you can click into, and you can define some of these. So, like for instance, we've detected 20 empty security groups. We found 3 VMs that have not been powered on for the last 15 days. So this could be key here, because let's say someone was doing some overnight work and had a maintenance window and powered down the virtual machines because they were doing changing out, what, let's say some hard drives or something, or within the actual one of the hosts. Well, let's say some of those VMs didn't get power back on. So this actually will tell us if we don't see VMs, and we can actually do queries and do a capture of, hey, what VMs were what state was are these VMs on this specific host, as an example, and that are powered on and powered off, and then we can, let's say after we do a maintenance window, say, okay, we're done. I think I got them all powered back on, as an example, or I moved back to the host. Let's say I migrated them to another host using vMotion. Um, I can then come in and do queries and do analysis, but we also will automatically look for that. So if we start to see things like, VMs that have been sitting powered off over a period of time, we'll flag those insights just to bring them to your attention. So that way you can take a look at these and determine, hey, was that meant to be turned, or was that meant to be left off, or is this something that did not get turned on that I need to go in and power that VM back up? We look at things like mass firewall rules. So again, we can call out firewall rules, and here's the firewall rules themselves, and we can, click on each one of these, see data sets on the firewall rules. These are again looking at like NSX firewall rules that are configured, preceding firewall rules. Again, these are just because they are the default rules that are deployed by NSX when you're doing like the distributed firewall. But as you're configuring firewall rules and you're doing microsegmentation within your infrastructure, and doing isolation, even like within VPCs, we're doing analysis to see if we're seeing anything that is masking or preceding, and calling that out so that you're aware of that. We look at things like applications that are impacted due to degraded flows, applications that are impacted due to abnormal traffic patterns, 46 new firewall rule hits, 45 VMs talking to the internet. So these are quick insights that you can click into right from the insight dashboard that we'll call out, and we're constantly monitoring within the main dashboard. And then we have other things that you can do, like you can see your environment. So as you're deploying different data sources such as NSX, vCenter, let's say in this environment, I don't have any underlay networking devices connected as or added as data sources yet. But let's say I've got like, my physical network devices and so on, router switches, those would all display across here as we add them as data sources. And they're giving us a health overview. So if I like click on my vCenters as an example, I can see I've got 3 different vCenters here. I can see the number of virtual machines that are deployed on the vCenters and see if I have any critical problems. Same thing goes with the host. I can see how many hosts are connected to that vCenter. Are there any problems on that host? They would light up by the color indicator, giving you a kind of a heat map that you can click into, and simply click into the dynamic items to be able to look at what hosts are actually configured and connected to that vCenter as example, and looking at configuration data for that host. What versions is it running? How much memory is the firewall? Is a firewall to be deployed? Is it active? What is this host? This is a Dell PowerEdge R640. Um, what is the OS that's running on it? What VLANs are connected to it? Is it powered on? How many VTEPs? How many physical NICs? What are its MTU configurations and so on? Maintenance mode. So a lot of different data that we can look at here just on a summary, and then we can click into the host and do more deep analysis from a performance perspective. And then more importantly, we're looking at information such as anomalies. So as I mentioned, the product will start taking all the flow data and configuration data and baseline it, and it will start looking at that data. And if it starts to see deviations from the baselines, then it's going to flag those as anomalies. So right now I have it filtered by application. So it's showing me applications that are anomalies are being detected on. And right now the metric that it's looking at is the average TCP round trip time. So what it's doing here is it's telling me that my MOAD VCF demo applications, which is made up of 3 different tiers, it's seeing anomaly detected on its average TCP round trip time. So now I can click on this and I can see here, and this is a new application that was just deployed. I can see, obviously we went from very minimal 6.1 millisecond, and then all of a sudden we started seeing a spike up to 545.5 milliseconds from a TCP round trip time within that application. So let's say I wanted to look at that because that is an anomaly that I might be concerned with. I can click directly into the application just by clicking on the application, and I can either do a troubleshooting session and launch a guided network troubleshooting, or I can say, let's just look at the application itself from the application dashboard and see what's going on. So here it is now pulling up the actual application and showing me a topology of the application and giving me data sets that are key and important from looking at this. So I'm looking at how much incoming traffic, how much outgoing traffic, how many flows are occurring within the applications, how many intents are currently configured against that application, what countries do we have interaction with? So if I click on this as an example, it's going to show me how many flows are to the United Kingdom, the United States, Ireland. If I wanted to click on like Ireland as an example, I can look at all the flows that are going to Ireland, see what ports they're on, what source and destination, and I can expand that and look at data such as where is it going to, Dublin, and so on as an example, and all of the information on the flows from a source and destination IP, port protocol, what networks it's utilizing, and so on. Cluster, VM, is it communicating to a physical IP or another virtual machine, let's say in another data center, as an example, or out on the internet anywhere. It's going to show me all of that different type of data that is communicating specific, let's say from a country perspective. So we can use that to be able to determine where traffic is going because we're doing GeoIP lookup on all the flows. And then this also can be an alert from a security perspective. We can set a query and say, hey, if we start to see flows that are going to a country that we know that flows shouldn't be going to, and we wanted to be alerted upon, we can actually have an alert that occurs and shows us those flows. This is going to also provide us with an overview of how many virtual machines, physical IPs, and Kubernetes services make up the application. And as I scroll down on the dashboard here, we have a topology that is showing us. And so here's a chart here showing, obviously internet, tier, network, shared services, other apps and members, virtual machines, load balancer, physical IPs, Kubernetes services. The shields are showing whether it's protected, partially protected, unprotected, and then the type of, if we're detecting a flow with an anomaly or problems, would light up the flow line between the source and the destination. So in this example here, I can see that I've got flows, going from the LG tier to the web tier. So if I click on that flow line, it's going to show me I've got 2 flows going from the LG to web. It's going to show me what the service endpoint is, how many flows, and what is the total traffic that is going to that specific endpoint, what port it is, and it's also going to tell me if these flows are seen as unprotected. So it's looking to see, do I have any firewall rules that are configured that are applied to that specific to this specific flow from a source and destination. So it's showing you the source and destination managers, what rules are applied. So we can see there is a rule, and then there's the default layer 3 rule, and the action is allow. Now, we can also take a look, and if we just want to look at the single flow itself between that source and destination, we can do that to be able to do analysis. So again, this is showing us our total traffic rate, the traffic rate average. So this is the average for the selected duration, which is going to be a 24-hour period. We can see that up here. And that is showing you its average at 4.9 megabits per second, and the average sum of the traffic is 49.3 gigs. Now, let's say I want to do more analysis on those metrics. So I can come in and I can say, I want to add more filters. So let's say we go to metrics and I could say, I want to look at what is the average TCP round trip time. So now I can see that, how many milliseconds is occurring just specific to this flow from a TCP round trip time. Or I can come in and say, what is the flow packet count on this specific flow? So now I just added the packet count and I can see how many packets are occurring specifically on this source to destination for this flow over that time period. So metrics that we're pulling analysis on top of the flow data, specifically, this is our flow, our source and destination VM, their physical IPs, and what port is being utilized. Now, just to answer a couple questions really quick, I see HP in the physical list. Is there any specific integration with HP Aruba switches? I believe we do support some of the Aruba switches. The compatibility matrix would actually give you which ones we support, so you can actually check against the compatibility matrix for operations for networks, and it will actually, you can select HPE, and it will tell you which devices we do support and have tested against. Integration with Tanzu Grid, but what about integration with vSphere with Tanzu? So I can tell you that that is something that is on the roadmap. I don't have a timeline for that, but yes, that is something that is being worked on currently. You mentioned application discovery earlier. Is there a way that you can highlight undocumented application sets or indeed orphan servers no longer in use? Yeah, so we can actually do that. So we can actually run queries for and look for orphan servers. We can also look at from an application perspective, undocumented, or we can do it, let's say if we're connected to ServiceNow as an example, we can look at undocumented versus the CMDB. We have a lot of customers that are utilizing that to true up their CMDBs. And then we can also, as we're doing analysis, let's say something changes in the application and we detect a new member to the application that maybe not currently documented, even, because of an application change or new communication. So I'll show you where you can actually call those out and see those. Next question, can we use this platform for NSX operations, including distributed firewall rule configurations, networking nodes, configurations? So yeah, you can, we don't actually send the firewall rules to the distributed firewall, but we will actually provide you with the firewall rules that you can actually export and import into the distributed firewall. So for certain, for reasons of this is a monitoring operations tool, we don't get into allowing it to actually do configuration upon those devices such as distributed firewall or NSX within our infrastructure. But we can provide you with that data that you can utilize to make those changes within the infrastructure. There are some automation pieces using scripting that can be done also that customers have done to automate that process because of the APIs that we support. Last question here, is there an impact on Palo Alto device if we integrate operations for networks with these devices? No. So the data pulling is very minimal, and you can actually adjust how often it pulls the data. So like, for instance, a Palo Alto device, if let's say you're managing your PAN infrastructure with Panorama, we can connect directly to Panorama and get data directly from Panorama and pull that data set via API and utilize minimal impact. I mean, it's very, very little impact on those devices as far as the data sets. And if you feel it is impacting or providing an impact to the device, you can change the collection intervals. So we do allow customization. You can say, let's say it's collecting data on a 5-minute interval, and you want it to be on switch it up to a 10-minute interval. um, you can do that. The other thing that to call out is that when we do pull that data, we're not constantly pulling the full data set every time. We'll do that upon the initial query, and then we look at it and we're just looking for any type of changes that have been made from the base data set. So we'll look at that, we'll scrape it, we'll determine what are the changes, and then we'll collect the data from those changes. But we're not going to constantly pull all of the data over and over and over again, if we're, depending on what type of data we're looking at. DFW has been enabled on NSXT if microsegmentation is used, and import all physical firewall rules for migration. So yes, so one of the things that you can do is, if let's say you have a Palo Alto firewalls and you want to pull firewall rules or from Checkpoint or Cisco ASA as an example, you want to look at the firewall rule sets. You can look at those firewall rules and utilize those exports to actually populate within, let's say, something like the NSX distributed firewall, or even at the tier 0 level from a north-south perspective, at your L3 or for layer 3 firewalling. You can get into utilizing that to create rule sets within NSX. Done there. Okay. So again, and even when I said you see these unprotected flows as an example, you can come in and you can see these unprotected flows, and then we can get suggested firewall rules and so on. As I mentioned, you can export all data. You can come in and do like export as a CSV. If I wanted to export these two flows as a CSV, I can also export as like example. I can come up here, and I can export to a PDF. All the data can be exported natively in the product, or you can actually do it via API calls. So the API data is right here. So API documentation, you can click on that and it will give you all the documents, the queries, and so on. You can even test them. And along with the user guide, all of that is built into the product. And one of the nice things also is we also have all of these different getting started. So from a use case perspective, let's say you want to get into doing application discovery, device auto discovery, network paths, and so on, search queries. So all of this you can click on, and it will actually walk you through click by click on doing application discovery. And so you can actually launch into that if you haven't performed that yet, and it will take you step by step through. Looking at different single application dashboards, application discovery types based off of flows again, or doing it via attributes, ServiceNow if you want to use ServiceNow and pull in from a CMDB, or if you want to add an application manually. So we have different guides and different ways that it will walk you through. So we have in-product guides that will actually guide you through that you can utilize. But to get back to our application, so we are looking at the application view here, so we can see the topology. We can click on various different flows. We can click on virtual machines within our tiers and look at that. As I highlight over, I can see that my web tier has 2 virtual machines. It is looking at from protected. It's saying it's partially protected. So there are some flows that we're seeing that don't have firewalls rules associated to them. I can look at those from a security perspective. I can see communication, between the tiers, like from web to the database tiers, an example. I can see I've got 1 flow, 2 unprotected flows, and I can see those 2 flows that are occurring. And then these are the 2 unprotected flows that it's not seeing associated firewall rules to. As I scroll, or actually before I scroll down, you can also click on what's new, and it's going to show you what's changed over the last 24 hours. So again, this is like there was no data before 24 hours. This is for the new application that was deployed. And we've seen now 1.8 gigs of traffic incoming and 766 megs outgoing since the actual application was deployed. And it's going to show it, any changes over the 24-hour period. Are we seeing drop flows, any type of alerts? Did someone add a new VM or Kubernetes service to the actual application? And is there anything that we're seeing that was added that's new unprotected? And then we're also going to look at external services that are being accessed, what ports and so on. So all of that data will populate. We can look at metrics for each virtual machine. So I can, as an example, come in and maximize this, and I can see each virtual machine that resides within and makes up this application and see how they're actual performing. So network traffic rate for each individual virtual machine. I can expand, look at the full data sets, and I can also add more filters and metrics depending on if I want to look at like CPU performance or if I want to look at network performance and so on. You can add any filter that you want to and do comparison data. From a flow perspective, this is just going to call out your top talkers. So it's going to show you who's got the most communication as an example, members of the application, what type. You can filter these also by VM, physical IP, Kubernetes, service, and so on. You can also see what top application flows by rules. So if you are running, like say, the NSX distributed firewall, it will show you what rules are getting the hits for this members of this application, how many flows, the total traffic. You can look at the rules themselves, and you can also click in and look at the flows that are hitting those rules and get detailed information on what members are hitting those rules. From a security standpoint, we can also get in and look at this from a service graph perspective here, and we can do either firewall planning, or we can even get into like VPC planning within NSX or tenant isolation. You can come in and you can choose on how you want to group the application. So you can do by like VLAN. So if I change it to VLAN, now it's going to show me what VLAN or overlay segments. I have NSX deployed, so it's showing me the overlay segments these VMs are connected to. If I want to do it by subnet, I can change it to subnet. Now it's showing me the subnet that and how many members reside on that subnet. And these are actually the communication that is going. You can see the incoming, outgoing, and bidirectional flows going to the internet, communicating from one subnet to another, shared physical resources, virtual, and so on. So you can carve this up based on however you want to look at it. So let's say I do like VLAN, VXLAN, or overlay. And then I come in and I want to keep focus on this logical switch, and I can see the flows that are occurring. So I've got intercommunication that's occurring within that logical switch. I can see communication going to another logical switch to the database, and the VMs there, the internet. If I want to look at all the traffic, I can just simply click on the actual selected object here, and it's going to show me all that traffic. So it's going to show me how many services, how many external services are being accessed, how many incoming and outgoing flows do I have going to this actual, let's say this was a VLAN or even a segment. And then I'm going to see the recommended firewall rules. So because I chose to look at this by VLAN or by overlay segment, it's now going to show me what my source and destination is. And this is based on, because we're doing all that flow ingestion and being able to see where all the communication's occurring, on what source, destination, ports, protocols, recommended action, and then how many related flows we're seeing. And as I expand those, it will also show me, is there any distributed firewall rule, as an example, that matches this specific recommendation. So an example here, I can see there is a firewall rule configured, rule 1663. The source is any. Here's the destination, specifically as to the Apache Cloud Security Group, and it has a flow, but that is not hitting all of them on the actual destination, so we're not fully segmented. If I want to see what those members are, like I said, within the web, I can click on the magnifying glass, and it's encompassing these three members. So as it's doing the actual firewall rule, if you were to take this firewall rule and export it and import it into, let's say, NSX, and deploy it across a distributed firewall, or even export it and apply it on a physical firewall, it's going to then include all of these objects. So the destination, because I chose by segment in this example, or by VLAN, will show you all the objects that it's looking at on that, that are configured or within that segment or that VLAN. So in this case, it's 3 different virtual machines that you would be providing segmentation to. And as we implement segmentation, we can look at things like dropped flows, protected allowed flows, unprotected flows, and so on. If we want to filter down, we can see our traffic distribution by east-west traffic, switch east-west. We can see our traffic by routed, VM to VM, what's within the same host, how much of that is north-south, and we can click into any of these and look at those flows and the data sets that we're seeing there. We also can click on and we can look at the search query that we did to actually get this data. We can also come up here and export this to a PDF and get a full detailed PDF on this specific application and all of the data sets within the actual, excuse me, within the actual microsegmentation planner. And then you also can see here that we have different ways that we can export rules. So we can do them as CSV, XML, YAML files, and that's all based off of depending on where you're going to import the rules and deploy the rules at. Is kind of the file type that we use. So if you're doing Kubernetes, you'd want to use YAML as an example. And then intents. So these would allow you to see different intents that are defined against the actual application. So let's go back to the overview. And as I scroll down further, also, it'll show you any alerts that are occurring. So firewall rule, VM membership changes. So if I expand these, it's going to show me VMs that have changed, different firewall rules that have been applied, or any change that's been applied to each VM and so on. So all changes, alerts, this could be anything related to the overlay or the underlay will show up here, only specific to the application. And then the application member managers, these are going to be things like your vCenters and so on like that. In this case, I've got one problem detected and it's saying flow collection is disabled. This is more of a best practice telling me that I've got flow collection disabled on some NSX edges port groups that, or I'm sorry, disabled on port groups that have NSX edges connected to them, giving me detailed information. And you can see we provide recommendations as to how to, what is the recommendation to resolve that. That's both for VMware and non-VMware infrastructure. And I just noticed we are pretty much at our time for the session. As you can see, the product itself encompasses a ton of different data and a ton of different use cases. So whether we're doing anything from planning security, doing migration planning, PCI compliance, doing guided network troubleshooting, configuring intents against our infrastructure, for like loops, flow utilization, mismatches, and so on to check against. There's so much data to cover in here. I mean, it's really hard to do it in an hour to an hour and a half segment. So maybe we can look at, a possible part 2 webinar. But at this point, I think we'll go ahead and kind of wrap things up here. And I'll turn it back to the team. But hopefully you found this information useful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your TAMs, and they can reach out to me or members of our team, and we'd be glad to work with you and talk to you deeper about individual use cases that you may have or have questions on that we touched on, especially when we were talking about the different use cases within the slides there. So team, I'll go ahead and hand it back to you.
Okay, Matt, thanks for giving us our money's worth today. This was great. Lots of good content. So we appreciate all your preparation and clear presentation here. And for all of you that attended, thanks so much for your interaction in the form of questions. They definitely help understand what you're interested in and guide the speaker. So thanks for interacting with us today. As we mentioned at the beginning, the presentation was recorded and your TAM will make that available to you. And please do join us next month when we'll be looking at the VMware Private AI Foundation. So April 10th, we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks all.